I can't wait for coffee. Oh, hello, barista.
What do you guys want?
Skim soy latte? Taryn, soy can't be skim.
Hot chocolate, orange juice.
No, Dad, I want coffee. Hot chocolate? Great.
So I just think I'm going to Sarasota. Can you give me a ride?
Yeah, sure. Are you cool with taking your sister?
Yeah.
Wait, what? I have my own plane.
Okay, I'll see you tonight. Okay?
Carly, how can I help?
So now can anyone tell me what she, as in Carly from the video, experienced in that coffee shop?
She was really scared and she got distracted easily.
Yeah. If you didn't notice, she seemed very overwhelmed by even the slightest noises, such as the coffee grinding or the people walking through the door, because of her sensitivity to light and sound. In situations similar to this, people with autism may feel stress and anxiety. Their reactions and gestures are a way of coping with the stress. Now Asmita will narrate a short story about an autistic girl named Rosie.
So, just like Carly, Rosie also has autism, but her story is a little bit more different. At school, Rosie had trouble making friends because of her autism. Although there were a couple girls who were her so-called friends, they would say mean things about her behind her back. So, because of this, Rosie decided to switch schools. After switching schools, the problems did not go away. There was a verbal bully who would put notes in her locker telling her how different she was from the rest of the group. So because Rosie couldn't cope for this by herself, she talked to her therapist, who told her to write down all the things that she experienced on a daily basis in a diary. Rosie also talked to her teacher, who she genuinely trusted. At the end of this experience, Rosie understood that it wasn't her fault that caused the bullying. So comparing Rosie's story and Carly's reactions at the coffee shop, what are some similarities and differences that you see? Yes. Anyone else? Yes?
Anxiety.
Anxiety. Anyone else? That's very good answer. So both of them were very anxious at seeing different people. And if you saw in Carly's video, her dad didn't get her the coffee that she wanted because he couldn't understand what Rosie was thinking in her mind. So just like that, Rosie also really wasn't understood by everyone else. Does anyone have any thoughts or reflections that they would like to share based on the two experiences that we just listened to and watched the video? Okay. So now to talk to us more on this topic will be Dr. Sarah Teisinger. She has a doctorate in acceptance of the social abilities of kids with autism and ADHD. She teaches at Flores Elementary School in Herndon, Virginia. Dr. Tyson.
Hello. I wasn't sure what to talk about today because there's so much to talk about and I could be here for hours. And I'm already going to change what I was going to say anyway. So I am a mother of 3 girls, twin 10-year-olds and a 12-year-old. And my youngest twin, by a minute, has, when she was 4 years old, was diagnosed with combined attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which is ADHD, a mood disorder, and combined anxiety disorder. And I'm sure some of you have had you've been around either peers who have had ADHD or have, friends whose children have them. And much like autism, ADHD, they have a lot in common, which is why I'm here. Not only do I have experience with autism, but I also have it with the ADHD side of it. One of the biggest things that they have in common is that the children suffer from social inabilities that most kids would naturally have. Can you go back a couple slides? To the one where it had like the therapy thing on it? This one. So over here where it says the early signs, the bigger difference between like an ADHD and an autism is the delayed speech and the rejecting cuddles, because autistic people, their feeling when they're touched feels different than when you're touched. To them, sometimes their brain almost accepts it as being painful. They don't, it's like they're in their own little bubble and they feel like you're invading their space. They need the personal space. For ADHD children, they don't have that, but the playing alone, hyperactivity, and the sleeping problems are very common in both sides. And a lot of that stems from the anxiety side of it. Imagine yourself holding your breath underwater and someone holding you under the water. After a while, you're going to start panicking, right? You're gonna, because you can't talk, you can't yell, you can't say what it is and you're gonna start panicking. That's what these children feel, especially the nonverbal autistic children, because just like you saw with Carly, she can't tell them what she's actually thinking and feeling. A lot of autistic children compare it to a brick wall. They're in the wall, they can see out, but nobody can see in. They can't talk out, they can only accept in. There has been no studies that have found a way to break that wall. I've had a student with autism every single year I've taught, and different variations of severity of autism. When I taught 3rd grade, I had a boy who was, we're gonna call him Sean, and he was nonverbal autistic. And I remember I told you about their touch is very different than our touch. Sensory for them is hyper focused. So if you may feel the carpet one way, but for them it could feel like spikes, or it could feel very soft, but their feeling is more intense than what you're going to feel. So a lot of times autistic kids either prefer to wear shoes because they don't like the feeling, or they prefer not to wear shoes. This particular student loved to not wear his shoes. And he was really funny in the mornings. He'd come in early, and I always knew when he was in my room because there'd be a shoe, a sock, like leading right into my room like a little breadcrumb train. And he loved, I had a little couch, because they're 3rd graders, I had it really low on the floor. And he would love to just go and throw himself on the pillows and just lay there. And he could never talk to the kids. He could only make noises. But acceptance in my class and with his grade level was something that I'll never forget. We're talking about third graders. So their social abilities at third grade's pretty, they're still learning at that age regardless, but to see their acceptance of a kid or a peer like this was amazing. We would do our morning circle, we'd sit, talk and introduce and do what we always do every morning, and he would sit there, and he particularly liked to sit next to this little African American boy whose head was mostly, he had just like little stubs for hair. He loved to sit next to him because he loved to rub his head. He loved the texture of his hair. And this little boy would lay his head on Sean's lap, and Sean would just sit there and rub his head. And I mean, I wouldn't even see normal third graders doing this on a regular basis just because, they're so macho. But this was how my class was. We would invite him in to do science experiments and activities that most kids, a lot of teachers were afraid to invite these kids in to do because it was scary, even a teacher, to deal with a child who can't talk. But really, they're no different than any of us. They still, and actually, I kind of think, and in my experience, I believe they're actually smarter than us. I have one this year who his severity of autism isn't as severe as the nonverbal, so he's perfect. He's an AAP. He's actually 3 years ahead in math. So it's one of those things where you wouldn't really know he had autism except when he tells you. And he really wasn't keen on telling people. He didn't like being pointed out. And I have 3 other kids in my class who have ADHD. So it's a very interesting class this year. And right at the beginning of the school year, I like to promote acceptance. I teach my students that it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, what abilities or disabilities you have. We're all a family, and that's it. Like, there's no questions about it. And so 3 of the kids who had ADHD, I have that connection with them because my daughter has it, and they have very similar anxiety issues. They show very similar social inabilities, and so instead of them feeling scared or left out, I promote it. Like, I was like, you know what? I would always tell them, Addison has that problem, or Addison does this, or Addison's my daughter, sorry. And they started to realize that they're not alone, and they had a personal connection to that. And then they all go, oh yeah, I do it too, and I do it too. And even kids who didn't have any of these disabilities started to realize they had very similar social anxieties, but they can overcome it differently than the kids who have these disabilities. So my kid this year, who has autism, he wanders around my classroom, and he will scare over people's shoulders, and he gets super focused on a calculator. So I'm trying to teach them science, and he's super focused on just punching numbers into a calculator. And at this particular day, he was in the back of my classroom organizing the tissue boxes, which the repetitive nature of anything calms them. It makes them feel more secure. And so I let him do it. Oddly enough, this kid can be reading a book and still absorb every single word I've said. So I let him do this because I know it makes him more comfortable. So we were talking about how different we all are. And we were talking about different things that we've all gone through. And one of my kids who had a severe ADHD was saying, you guys don't know what it's like to be in my head. I think of one thing and then the next thing I'm on a different topic and I can't keep up. And I said, yeah, it's a lot like autism. And my sweet little boy stands up and he goes, I have autism. And I wanted to applaud him because I knew how much that took him to do, because he really never liked to advertise it. And I told him, I said, I know. And funny thing is one day, somebody with autism or ADHD is going to figure out how to cure out all of the things that we have. They're going to figure out world peace. They're going to figure out a cure for cancer. And he kind of stopped and looked at me and I said, think about all of the abilities that you have and that kids like you have. And they started to stop and reflect on the positive sides of their disabilities, not such the negative side. Not the point that people stare at them or are irritated with them or don't want to be around them. And it's not, and I say irritated, and I say it in such a serious manner because it is. These kids will have a friend or lose a friend just as quick as you breathe, because their abilities to talk or do things is so much different that a lot of times the kids their own age get irritated with them and can't stand being around them. And so another sign of autism and ADHD and all of that is they thrive on children older than them or adults. I often have very adult conversations with my student this year. And they're very mature, he speaks more eloquently than some of the teachers in my school. But that's because he thinks at a different level, and it's harder for him to be with somebody his own age because they're almost a maturity level below him, which is odd. But like I said, these disabilities make them more advanced. But the problem is so many times they don't either have the focus or the ability to get it out of their head. So like I said, he's 3 grade levels in math ahead. He's gonna be pretty much out of high school level math by the time he's a freshman. And the way he can do math isn't normal. Like when we teach you 2 + 2, he looks at it in such a different way, but he can do it so much faster. And he's able to speak and he's able to get it out of his head, but there are kids who have all these answers that we've been fighting for years to figure out. They're in their head and they can't get it out. And it's fascinating to watch them put it on paper and to be able to do it, because you, even as an adult, you learn new ways of doing things through these kids. And being accepting and actually just taking a breath and sitting back and looking at these kids from their point of view is so much more important. It's gonna be easy to just avoid them or not play with them or not invite them to your birthday party because you're afraid they're gonna embarrass you. My daughter does not get invited to things very often. Her peers really alienate her. She was originally at another school with her twin sister, and that school was like half the size of Flores. Their class sizes were like about 17 kids. And imagine you being purple and your sister being a normal color. And everybody wants to be with your sister, but they don't want to invite you because you're purple. And you're just invited because you're your sister's twin. That's what she was going through. They'd invite her sister, who was very social, like she's a social butterfly, she gets along with everyone. And Addison has a hard time doing that. So they would say, hey, come to my birthday party. I guess you can invite your sister because she's your twin. And so Addison never had her own friend group. And so I moved her to Florida so that she would have her own community. And when you ask her who her best friends are, she would tell you it's one of our music teachers or one of her other specials teachers, because that is who she thrives for. Like she accepts adults better because her peers alienate her, even in a different school from her sister. She's not able to do tasks just as quick as, so if I tell you to stack the chairs at the end of the day, she may stack a couple, but then she's gonna get distracted. And the kids get irritated with that, and then they don't wanna talk to her, and then it just becomes a snowball effect. And she usually, just like the boy in my class, usually lets it roll off her back. She's not really acute to it, but lately she has become more because acceptance has started to dwindle. And same for the kid in my class. He's been at this school since he was in kindergarten, and the kids are starting to get irritated with him, and it's starting to become more of an issue for him because they're at the point of where acceptance is starting to dwindle. And I think it's because we're starting to focus on so many other issues that we're not going back to the same, we're all different no matter what, and we need to understand the other side. I would say pretending remember holding your breath underwater and not being able to come out is probably the best thing to remember when you meet somebody who's different. Doesn't matter if they have Down syndrome, autism, ADHD, any of those disabilities, there's always something that they're fighting to figure out. For you, under the water would be trying to breathe. For these kids, it could be talking, it could be just being around you, it could be accepting someone just touching their arm. For some kids, that would set them off screaming, as if you were punched in the face. To them, just touching their arm gives that same reaction, and they just scream. Because they don't have the ability to just say, I need my personal space. So I think the biggest thing to remember is that everybody has a quirk. We all do, no matter what. None of us are perfect. We all may sneeze funny, cough funny, may not be able to spell, may not be able to do math, or be able to write a paper. We all have something that we struggle and are learning to do, and it's the same for these kids. They go through therapies to learn how to possibly even speak. Some of them don't. Some of them have to do it on a digital board. Some of them, it's just a matter of being able to sit in a class for a few minutes longer than what they were before. Sometimes with these kids in kindergarten, they come in for 5 minutes, and their goal in school is just to be able to sit in a class for 15, 20 minutes by the time they get to 6th grade. It's a very slow process, but it's process. They're getting somewhere. And as a mom who sees this in her child on a daily basis, it makes me mad, because you just want to go up to the kid and be like, what are you doing? You need to see that she's not this person that you're making her out to be. But it's hard, because as a teacher and the person, I've done a lot of research on this, and my doctoral research was on this, and we went through 3 or 4 different types of introducing these kids to social skills, bringing in parents, bringing in psychologists, bringing in school counselors, different programs in the school. And every time there was not one way that we could get every single kid to be more socially accepted. It's just how it is. So bringing awareness to it and bringing acceptance to it is going to be really the predominant way to get these kids into society on a normal basis. So if you see one in the store, just remember in the video that people were staring at her because they could see that she wasn't like her sister. And so they noticed that. Like I said, they can see out, but it's hard for them to speak out. And they know people are staring at them. They know people are irritated with them. And what is the worst part is when they finally find that voice and you hear just about how much it hurts them. Because it's like being shunned by your best friend. You just want to be accepted, no matter what abilities they have. So, smile at them. Instead of seeing a kid with disabilities and you kind of stare at them, smile at them. I always try to smile, just because I may not be able to speak to them, but I want them to know that they're no different than the other kid in the other aisle in the supermarket, Just smiling at them, they may not know you, but they're gonna know that you're being friendly. Smiles are smiles in every country, every language. Just like saying hello. Hello is, happiness, all of that. Doesn't matter where you're from. It's positive behavior. So no matter what their ability is, just being nice and friendly and smiling at them will get somewhere. It will make them feel good, even if it's for the day. They feel like they weren't looked at or looked down upon when they can go to the supermarket. So I really think that's the biggest thing. Like I said, remember how it is to be underwater and you can't breathe. I think every time you see a kid like that, just remember that's something, speech or texture or something to them, that's how they feel. That struggle and anxiety and panic. And it'll be surprising as you look around and see how many more of these people are out in society. You'll be surprised just how many are there. And I promise you, in I would say maybe less than 20 years from now, It's gonna be another Einstein. It's gonna be another Thomas Edison. And ironically, Einstein had autism. And look what he did. So, like I said, someday, they're gonna figure this out, they're gonna find a way that these kids can speak, and it's going to be amazing. We're gonna finally have answers that we've been working years and years on. So just remember that in a few years when you hear that, you're gonna go, somebody told me that way back in 2020. Anybody have questions?
I would like to open up the floor for the audience to ask any questions, or to tell any personal stories that they would have.
Feel free to ask any questions to Ms. Tyson.
Does anyone have any personal stories that they would like to share? Dr. Tyson, so I had a few questions for you actually. So how can I as a student respond to someone with autism who's having a fit or a meltdown?
Biggest thing is to give them their space. Like I said, personal space for them is really, for us standing right next to someone might be uncomfortable, but for them, even standing a couple feet around them can be more uncomfortable. So give them their space. Always talk in a calm voice and just say, how can I help you? Getting upset or being disrespectful back to them only amplifies it. So really just, sometimes they just need to be alone. They recoup, or for the one boy I had in my class who was nonverbal, his favorite thing was beaded necklaces. So I bring him beaded necklaces every week, and that calmed him down. Anytime he'd get anxious or something, I'd give him a strand of beaded necklace and he'd play with the beads. So, you know, if you're out with someone and you see that they're getting amped up, give them space and just calmly talk to them. Sometimes it's just like a little child who's throwing a temper tantrum. The calmer you are, the calmer you speak to them, the more quickly they're gonna calm down themselves.
And how would you as an adult take care of it?
As an adult, if they're by themselves, you need to find whoever it is that's with them. Most of the children and people who have severe autism they're not by themselves. A lot of the kids with autism who are more severe can't live by themselves. They usually have to live in a group home, or they'll live with their parents. So find the person who's there with them, because they can be very violent and not meaning to be violent. I had a kid in my one class who would bang his head against the desk pretty massively. And it wasn't something where I could like put my hand underneath it and say stop. He doesn't understand that. So we would try to distract him or things like that, but it was one of those where if somebody who didn't know what was going on tried to interfere, it could have caused more harm than the people who are aware of that person or that child's inability to do something. So as an adult, be accepting. Like I said, try to talk to them, smile. They may not be able to talk back, but just talk to them. But if they're having an outburst, best thing to do is just find somebody who's there with them. There's always going to be somebody there with them.
I have a question. When I went to a store, I saw a kid who came with earrings, and he went to an aisle and started shopping. So at that point,
Can you repeat the question?
So at that point, I came to shop, and like many others came. So I thought maybe I shouldn't look. He might feel bad. I mean, how should we react? Like, should we ask him for help, or if we keep staring at him, will he feel discomfort, or
Yes.
So, how can we react to that? Just continue your shopping or?
I'm gonna stand up so I can face you, sorry. So, two sides of that. I've been the mom, and I've been the teacher, well actually 3 sides. I've been the person in the store too. Like I said, my daughter was 4 when we diagnosed her, the doctors diagnosed her. When she was 3, I knew something was different. And I got a lot of pushback with, she's 3. I'm like, no, you don't understand. She's 3 and we can't take her in public. She would have that massive meltdown. And it was more than, I mean, we've all seen kids melt down. And they're like, you know, you didn't get a toy that you wanted and they're gonna have a meltdown. These were unconsolable, cannot calm her down, meltdown. So it became my husband or I would stay home and the other one would go take the other 2. And the doctors were like, oh wait, that's different. And still to this day, we will have our moments where that happens. And ironically, she's in chorus and we went to our Pyramid Chorus concert. And she started to have one in the car because their anxiety builds up. And ironically, it actually starts to put blinders on them. So she's in the back of the car, she's getting anxious, she's getting amped up. Her sisters are now feeding into this. We pull up to drop her off and you open the door and you just hear her screaming. And I am utterly embarrassed in front of all these people. And after she calmed down and after the whole event, I pulled her and I said, do you realize how embarrassing that was? And she goes, what did I do? She didn't even realize what she was doing. And she didn't realize that these people were staring at her. And a lot of times I'm like, these people, everybody's staring at you, and she does, they're almost in their own blinders. What I always suggest, and this is what I always do, is I look at the parents, and it's like, I get you. It's okay. Because the parents are the ones who are seeing it. The kids really aren't. They will have complete, it's amazing, and some of these kids will go like this for hours, and there's nothing the parents can do, there's nothing anybody can do other than just pull them out of the environment. Stimulation's a really big issue. A lot of lights, flashing lights, sounds. That's why you'll see a lot of them in the stores where they have the meltdowns, because the lights and the sounds and the constant will get them frustrated. It's overstimulating. And then as the parent, you're like, what do I do? There's just nothing you can do. And it's worse for the parent, and it's worse for the person who's there. And so I make it a point now, and I just go over and I'm like, it's okay. You've got, and so, and unfortunately, we're all, even the parents are helpless when it comes to that. The best thing to do is, the one thing I always hated was people look at me like I don't know how to handle my child, or that my child's this horrible monster. And I call these all the invisible disease, because unlike this Down syndrome where you can tell visually that they've got a disability, autism and ADHD is invisible. And so from the outside, they look like just a kid who's out of control. And I'm just a terrible parent. And just just somehow letting the parents know that you get it and it's not them. Because that's the worst thing of all of it, is you have the parent crying, you've got the kid crying, and now you're like, I can never go back out in public again. And I think accepting the kids with disabilities is almost as important as accepting the parents who have to deal with it too. They don't get as much support, they don't get talked about as much, because you're so focused on having the child be accepted that, and you bring up a great point thinking about this. It's like, you know how I said a lot of these kids don't get invited to parties? A lot of the parents don't get invited to things either, because they're like, oh, I'm gonna bring a child. And the child's gonna be this or that. And then you go to events and you're like, oh my gosh, please don't have a meltdown. Please don't be embarrassing us. So in that regard, I almost think it's worse for the parent, their feelings wise. And it's hard not to stare. I mean, even when a normal kid sitting there having a temper tantrum, you're just like, really? Come on, give your mom a break kind of thing. But for the kid, like I said, they have blinders on. I would just kind of be like, it's okay, it'll get better. Even if their kid doesn't have autism and they're just having a kid who's meltdown, we've all been there at some point. Or you have a sibling who's been there and you're just like, I get you. And I think bringing that into, the parents are gonna start to feel more accepted also. But yeah, it's hard, but it's really interesting how they don't, you know, even the kid I have in my class now, he had a big outburst and the kids were really angry at him. They wouldn't tell him, but they were really upset with him, and our special ed aide pulled him out and talked to him, and he goes, I don't know what you're talking about. He didn't see it. He didn't see what was going on around him as he was having this outburst. And on one side, it's kind of nice because they're not going to be feeling as insulted as we would, but on the other side, it's like, we all see what's going on, and it's, for us, we're like, that's not normal. So, just, like I said, smile. Sometimes the parents just need to know it's okay. You know, don't stare at the parent.
And I have another question. So, yeah, I mean, when after the kid is born, he will bring to the school. So, are the kids getting educated from this one? Like, you know, now you told me, and you know, these girls have a presentation. At this point, I have learned a lot. So, in the schools, in the class, the kid, you have an autism kid, ADHD kid. So, are the kids getting educated like, you know, this is how you have to behave with this guy? So, that way, you know, they won't be mad at him, they won't be upset with him. They also will know, okay, sometimes this is his behavior, but he really don't know that. That's why he is doing it, he or she, right? So, in the schools, is the counties or whatever giving us such education to their kids? At least
So-
it's like half an hour or 1 hour is fine, right?
Yeah. And that's really interesting. So the level of severity depends on the child's participation in class. I told you I had the nonverbal kid when I had 3rd grade. He was only in my class in the mornings, and he would come in for just little chunks, 5-10 minutes during the day for different activities that his special ed teacher and I felt he could participate in. So he wasn't going to be in the middle of the academic side of it so much because he really could not handle it. It was way too much for him to be in a class of 20-some kids. So he was in a class of 3, and he would get his own specialized education in the classroom. They call it self-contained. So those are kids who are assigned to a special ed teacher, and they get all of their academic learning from the special ed teacher. They get the social side of it by being in the common classroom, and they're only, and depending on the severity, depends on how many hours. So the teachers and the special ed teachers and the psychologists all sit around and have meetings beginning of the school year to determine how many hours those children need to have in the normal classroom social setting. So he wasn't in that often, but like this year, my kid this year is in the whole day. And he has grown though. When he was in kindergarten, he was in a self-contained. And his abilities have grown to the point where he is now, he goes to Rachel Carson for math in the morning, and then he comes, and they weren't even sure he'd be able to handle that. And he's been able to in a normal classroom, and then he rides the bus over and he comes in my classroom and he's with me the whole rest of the day. He does have a tendency to distract sometimes. His biggest distractions is that he'll get up and wander around the classroom and then stare over the kids' shoulders. And the kids are very accepting of it, but I'm like, you've got to sit down. And there's a lot of, you've got to sit down. I will tell everybody to line up to leave the classroom, and he'll still be sitting there focused on something. And so I would say he's probably more the quieter side of autism, luckily. But I also have, like I said, I have a whole gamut of abilities this year. One of the kids who has severe ADHD is a completely different case. He screams out, he is distracting, he will yell rude things across the classroom, and it becomes very frustrating, and the kids get very frustrated, and it does become distracting for the rest of the kids in the classroom. And so that's when we have to have a meeting, and we're like, what do we need to do to fix this? Because when it comes to educational, and this is federal level, this isn't just state or county, federal level, these kids, in 1969 they created a Disabilities Act where children of any disability is required to have an education. We have to provide it. Prior to that, a lot of these kids were put in institutions. Locked away, you never saw them, they weren't in society. It was embarrassing to have a child like this, and after that, they were like, we need to figure out a way to accept them. It has grown. Every year it gets better and better and better. When I started college, they called it was a thing called mainstreaming, where a child of any disability, it didn't matter if it was severe or not, were only in the classrooms for a couple minutes. So imagine just having a slight disability and you're put in a room with kids who can't even speak just because you've been entitled to have one. Nowadays, just like the kid I have this year, he's in all the time, and the ones who are more severe aren't. And they come in once in a while. But it's because not only do the rest of the kids deserve an education, these kids do. And so it's a balancing act. If for the one I have who's an outburst kind of kid, we have gotten more support in the classroom. I have an additional aide that comes in and talks to him and works with him, and we, as a teacher, I think it falls a lot on the teachers too. You learn the kids, you learn who they are, you learn their little nuances. So I know what might spike a tantrum from him. Certain things like group work. He doesn't get along with kids, he wants to be in charge all the time. And so it's like, okay, this is coming up. We're gonna try to preempt it. And if he does start to have an outbreak or an outburst, we pull him out because it is not fair to the rest of the kids. And so it's a balancing act. There's a lot of support, a lot of structure that's built into the plans, and it's called an IEP, and that tells the teachers what has to be done, and that follows the kid all the way through. So it can be adjusted every year, but I got theirs from last year, and I see, okay, these are the things I need to watch out for. They need frequent breaks, or they need small group, or whatever, and then that just continues with the kid. So it's almost like an instruction manual for the child. But that's also where these kids are gonna know, okay, we may have to reset. We may be having a discussion and this child screamed out at something and we're just gonna have to reset. And it's an interesting kind of thing where, that's why I kind of like to, and I'm an oddball when it comes to that. A lot of teachers are afraid to have these kids in their classes or really don't address it. The elephant in the room, I'm like, okay, at the beginning of the school year, we are gonna learn. We all have a disability or an ability of something, so that they're prepared. When that kid starts screaming, they're like, okay, I know it's gonna be taken care of no matter what, she's got my back. That child is taken care of, and then we're gonna go right back into teaching and learning. And so it is something that I'm not gonna lie, there are classes, not that, in my first school that I taught in, we had somewhere the parents were like, this kid is constantly disrupting. Why? Depending on the age, it could be that they're not diagnosed yet, and this is now the big sign that there is something going on, and we have to talk the parent into figuring out what's going on. We have parents who sadly are like, there's nothing wrong with my child. He might be climbing up the wall and screaming, and they're just like, no, there's nothing wrong with my child. And that breaks my heart because it's hard for the child. Like, they're not old enough to go to the doctor and say, hey, I have something that's bothering me, and you're like, look, as a parent, I have to say there's something wrong with my kid, or she's not gonna get any better. And it's frustrating. But that's the classes where it tends to really affect the rest of the kids because there isn't anything set up yet. It tends to happen a lot in the younger grades because that's when this stuff starts to come and arise on the child. As they're older, you'll see it more where it's handled, where if there is an outburst, they pull them out. And it has become something actually nationwide. There's been an increase in aggressive behavior with kids with disabilities because they are trying to become more accepting of them in the classroom. You may have seen advertisements for articles about having to evacuate classrooms. And we had one this year. He was not diagnosed and he would become violent. He actually tore the urinal off of the bathroom wall in the boys' bathroom. He was in 4th grade. Even the janitor was like, I don't know how he did this, but he wasn't diagnosed. He would throw furniture and become very violent, and they had to evacuate the kids out of the classroom. And being here, we're like, oh my gosh, we're the only people having to deal with this. And then it became a national, like, we started reading articles, it came on the news where it's like, this is becoming a national problem. Because some of these things, we don't know yet. I mean, the kid could be perfectly fine one year and the next year be tearing urinals off the wall. So it's one of those things where as things happen, we have to take it. But that was a really tough year for him, for the class, because the class kept getting pulled out and having to be put somewhere else in the middle of their education. The parents were getting mad, and we were all getting upset, because it's like, well, our kids aren't getting educated, and because he's throwing a fit in the classroom, and it's a process. But usually, I've been lucky enough to have the kids who've already gone through the process, and we figured it out. But it's a lot on the teachers to figure out how to balance it and keep the kids going, and tell the parents it's okay. Don't worry, your child's not gonna, not get whatever they need this year from it. And that's, and at like I don't know one school who would be like, we're gonna focus on the kid with the disability. You guys will be fine, don't worry, don't, and then the next year they're going on with hardly any education. I don't know one school that does that, nationwide. They really are, they're focused on both, but they know that sometimes it just means pulling that kid out, and that kid just may have to be in a classroom by themselves so the other kids can learn. So it's a balancing act, it really is. Did that answer your question? Okay. I know I ramble a lot, sorry.
I have read a couple of articles on autism. So most of the articles pointing to vaccination because of vaccination, these are coming. So do you have any comment on that?
Yes, I do. So there is no scientific backing to immunizations. And I have a friend who has a pretty severe autistic son. He has never had a vaccination, but not by her choice. It's because he's allergic to some of the things inside the vaccination, like they'll use eggs and things for preservatives, and he's allergic to that stuff, so he can't get the vaccination. And we've all had these conversations, like, what do you think? And it's one of those things where somebody assumed, they like try to put a connection to it, and they were like, oh yeah, it could be this. But it's just like eating fast food now. The foods have preservatives. The foods have all these additional chemicals put in it that they didn't have prior, where we would eat fresh fruits and fresh, even now, even fresh stuff has the chemicals on it. So looking at it, it's not so much the immunizations, it's, you gotta look at what's in our environment now. What are we eating now? Even though they still haven't tied exactly to it. They haven't found any genetic tie, they haven't found a chemical tie, they haven't found, but in my opinion, if it was the immunizations, why aren't there more kids with it? You know what I'm saying? And also autism the percentage of boys and girls, it's predominantly found in boys. There are some girls with autism, but the percentage, it's more like 75-25%. Which again makes me wonder, well then why, if all these kids get the same immunizations, why is there only a certain group? And I feel like there's not enough research to show what other things are these kids coming in contact with? What kind of foods were they, eating? What kind of environment were their mothers in when they were pregnant? Like looking at that instead of just saying it's an immunization thing. I think that was like one case and it just blew up. And it also doesn't help that there were people, very famous people, who kind of got on the bandwagon of immunizations, and then everybody was like, well, you're famous and you're saying this, I think this is the way we're gonna go. And I think that didn't help. But I mean, there is not one scientific research that's done that has said it's an immunizations. But I think it's kind of one of those where people need a reason, and they're just gonna put whatever they can in there, and it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna blame it on it just because you need that reassurance or that hole filled as to what the problem is. Like with Down syndrome, they finally figured out what causes Down syndrome. And it's a genetic thing. There's a genetic marker that caused this. Where with autism and even ADHD, all of those, there's nothing that proves why. And like I said, if you look at history, autism was not as prevalent as it is now, but look at how much we've started adding to foods. And a lot of people have gone to more organic foods and more of that, and trying to avoid, you know what I'm saying?
So do you suggest change the lifestyle and good habits for the future generation?
Oh, I do. I think we definitely need to look at going back to more natural. Yeah, and I understand their need to use the pesticides and the chemicals. I get the need for what they see. And we're also more of a transient and busy lifestyle than they were in the past. But I also feel like if we want to eat more organic and more healthier foods, they need to make it accessible for any person, not just the people who can afford it. Because you go in there and you buy an apple that's organic and it's like twice as much as an apple that's not. Well, a family who can't afford it are going to go to the one that they can afford, and that's not helping them either make those good choices of, for them it may be easier to buy something that has a lot more preservatives in it just because it's cheaper than being able to go, or, that kind of thing. Like, I feel like we need to give the opportunity, because now a lot of households, both parents are working. There's not the one sitting home being able to cook meals. And I think we just need to look back at our lifestyles and just put a lot more healthy thoughts into it than, it's busy. I'm guilty, very guilty of it. I cannot preach having a healthy lifestyle because I'm extremely busy and, we're not always able to do that. But I do think that that would be such a huge shift, because society now, everything, you have to work because you can't afford anything otherwise. You have to work, and so it's one of those things that that's the way to promote it instead of saying it's.
Yeah, why I'm asking this question is for these kids. What do you suggest for their lifestyle?
Oh yeah.
And they're going forward to take care of.
Be cautious of what you're eating. That's the big thing. I know sugar is easily accessible. And ironically, sugar has been tied into the hyperactivity and the emotional mood swings. Dyes, the artificial dyes. So every time you eat those fun dip sugar things, that's all artificial dyes. Think about it. I know as a kid it's great to eat it. Think about how you feel though when you eat it. You don't always feel that great, right? But if you eat something a little more, or if you eat only once in a while, but you eat more healthy stuff, you're gonna feel better. And going forward, it's like, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're older and you've got health problems because of the choices you make now as a kid. So limit is good, don't cut it out completely, but just be more thoughtful of what you are taking. But those artificial dyes, there's so many ties to that, to all of these things. We cut it out of my daughter's diet. The boy in my class, his mom and I talk all the time. It's been cut out of his, and it helps with sleep, it helps with anxiety, it helps with emotional outbursts, and it's not just, all three of my girls, we don't use artificial dyes, and all three of them, we've seen a difference. So you're talking not just having to have a disability, anybody, you're gonna feel better by making those healthier choices and be active. I know I'm gonna sound like a commercial, but educate yourself all the time. Like, I really felt like I was gonna be 80 years old and still in college, because I like to be in college. Reading all the time, like that keeps your brain moving. People who read or do word problems or do awful spelling stuff, they are less likely to have Alzheimer's or dementia as they're older, because they keep their brain moving. I remember my grandmother would write down everything she'd do, word problems every day, because she didn't want to have dementia. She ended up with a stroke, unfortunately, which caused her to lose some of her speech. But she was like, I did things every day so that my brain wouldn't do this. And it wasn't that her brain had the problem. It was because she had a stroke, which caused her speech to, so she was perfectly fine brain-wise. It was just her speech had been flawed by the stroke. And it really showed for that. It's like, she could have lost a lot more than just her speech ability. But it really does, that has been scientifically proven. Reading is a huge thing. And just doing, word finds and things like that, even if it's on your cell phone, because I know everybody here likes their cell phones, don't lie. Doing word searches on your cell phones are even fine. You're reading, you're looking at letters and stuff. So don't lose that, okay? Don't play video games, that's not the way to do it. I do really sound like one of those after school commercials, don't I? That's awful. I feel old now. know. And that's the weird thing. Some children have shown signs of it as early as being infants, but because of the signs of the touching and the hyperactivity, it's usually more towards the age of 2 that they start to see it. We had a friend, my husband is military, we lived in Hawaii. And one of the guys he was stationed with had a young son who had autism, and they knew he had it before he could even sit up. Because they noticed that he loved to stare at the ceiling fan. Babies love things that move, so they were like, oh, maybe he's just one of those that it didn't, he didn't think anything of it. By the time he was 2, they knew for a fact, like the doctors easily diagnosed it, because that staring at the fan, it wasn't like he was, if you ever watch a baby with something above them and they kind of like smile and they interact with it, he would stare at it and just watch it for hours. And that's not like a normal baby thing. And so in that case, they had seen it early, but in some kids, they don't see it until they're 4, 5, 6 years old. But they haven't been able to determine whether you're born with it or not, because there's no consistency to it. Just like my daughter at 3, where I knew something was different, the doctor's like, she's 3. And that's the problem, is there's that stereotype of, they're little, they're still kind of doing their thing and we're not sure yet. I feel like as a parent, you have that gut feeling that there's something just off. But even the parents who, like the kid I have, like I said, I talk to his mom all the time, she's like, we really didn't see anything until he was about 3 years old. My friend who has the severe autistic son, she didn't know until he was almost 4. He didn't show any signs until he was 3. She said she believed she saw something and she wasn't sure, but by 4 they knew. And so there were all those years where she didn't even know. And then when she told me, I was like, are you kidding? I've been around him all this time and I didn't even see it. And so it's unfortunately, like all of those, the invisible diseases are, and it's heartbreaking because you don't know. And as a mom, you're going, what did I do? And it's weird for me because I have twins. And I was like, okay, I did the same thing. You both got exactly the same thing. Why does one have this and one doesn't? Why does one have the, outbursts and it's hard for her twin sister who's like, what is wrong with you? You're not like me in that regard too. And that's ironically, the one I had who was nonverbal in 3rd grade had a twin brother who was advanced academics. Like this kid is a rocket scientist. Like he could tell me things I didn't even know about. And his brother's nonverbal in a self-contained classroom. And it's those cases where you've got twins and you're like, wait, how on earth? And that really makes you wonder then. Because genetic-wise, why did one not and the other? And it does, so, and even that they don't know. And it's really weird when you've got, and that was like literally one end of the spectrum to the other in severity. And that fascinated me more than anything. But they don't know, and that's the worst part. Because these parents would all be on board of not being around this or that or that. They say don't smoke when you're pregnant because they could cause this. Well, okay, that's easy. But you don't know what it is that's causing this. Which also makes me think it's more environmental too, but you never know. It's just, unfortunately. Any other questions?
Thank you so much for coming. I'll get you. Oh, thank you, sweetie. Okay, so now Shivani will talk about the impacts that we can make, positive impacts that we can make on the autistic community.
So how can we make a positive impact on the lives of autistic people? Well, the first thing we can do is be understanding. They can't always convey their messages in a comprehensible way, so let's be patient and understand that they're trying their best. Secondly, be kind. Simply by smiling at them when you pass them in the hallway or talking with them at lunch can make their day. Next, don't judge them. People with autism have something called sensory dysregulation. Sensory dysregulation is when you cannot control your sensory system. Because of this, they may show physical symptoms such as repetitive motions, repetitive words, and they may avoid eye contact. We shouldn't judge them because it isn't something they control. One simple thing we can do is treat them as a fellow being who has hopes, dreams, feelings, and desires. We can show that we care about their opinions because they do matter. Last but not least, we can care for them. So let's say you walk into a room and you see your siblings struggling with their math homework. Do you A, laugh at them because they don't know, or B, help them work through it? The answer is B. So now let's imagine this situation with an autistic person. Though it may not be about math homework, it definitely does cause them stress and anxiety. What we can do is help them and encourage them to try their best.
So hopefully you've gotten our point across. We really want our community and society to accept those with autism. So a simple and quick way to do this is to participate in our Devote Your Notes program. Devote Your Notes is a simple way to show that you care and accept those with autism. All you have to do is write a positive, uplifting note, and it can be something as simple as keep smiling or keep being positive. Something as simple as that will make their day. So we'll be sending all of these notes to an autism center called CARDS. It's a therapy center in Sterling, and it's just something that will make them feel happy. So you can write your notes at the table over there, as well as give us any feedback that you have, which we would greatly appreciate. We would like that. And you can grab a snack as well. So you can do that. You can write as many as you want. So you can do that after I wrap up. Those are our credits. So I would like to say thank you for everyone coming who came here today. You made a huge impact. Even if you don't use this information tomorrow or the day after, you do have some information in your brain now, which means that you're more prone to use it. And you're going to be passing this on to a bigger audience. I would also like to say a special thank you to all of our parents who supported us, as well as Dr. Tysinger for teaching us so much more about this, just accepting them, which is, I feel like, is a really, really big problem in society. Thank you so much for coming, and we hope you can make an impact.